bear with me. Don't walk out on me if you say, oh, you've heard this before, because you're going to hear some new things also. Civilization only went back to about 3500 BC. The Sphinx was carved in about 2500 BC. The Sphinx sits on the Giza Plateau outside of Cairo. It's on the edge of the Sahara Desert. It's carved into the limestone bedrock, just to give you a little foundation. And it sits largely below ground. And I realized very, very quickly on my first trip there that there is something amiss with the standard dating of the Sphinx. 2500 BCE for the Sphinx, 4,500 years does not cut it, because in fact the Sahara Desert is older than that, and what you see on the Sphinx is weathering that's not compatible with the Sahara Desert. I also want to point out, and I'll come back to that point, that when they carved the Sphinx, it was a real triumph of engineering, if you would. A lot of people don't realize this or don't think about it. They did not just chip away the rock to free the body of the Sphinx. They actually carved it into multi-ton blocks, some of which weigh 50 or maybe up to 100 tons, and they moved them to construct what are now known as the Sphinx and Valley Temple. This is the Sphinx Temple with the Valley Temple off to the left, and you can see some people for scale. So these structures are as old as the original core body of the Sphinx. And there you can see another picture of it. The Sphinx sits due east of the second pyramid. That's a so-called Khafra pyramid in the background. And what I found on that first trip there was that the core body of the Sphinx and the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, again, they had to carve down into the bedrock, is eroded by water. It's weathered and eroded by water. This is incompatible with the hyper-arid climate, and it's not just that it was water, it had to be protracted rains. It was not water, for instance, rising up from the Nile. It was protracted rains. It was water runoff from the rest of the plateau, and this is evident both in what I call the rolling, undulating profile, and the deep vertical fissures that you see in the rock. The person in the bottom right, that's younger me when I was first studying it. And here I am with John Anthony West, younger me, and as I said, this is not due to Nile flooding. Some of my critics have said, oh, well, it's now Nile flooding. Yeah, right. The Nile does not flood up to the head of the Sphinx, number one. And number two, it would not produce these types of erosional features. That's just basic geology 101. And the Sahara Desert has been a desert for some 5,000 plus years. So the logical conclusion I came to is that you look at the different erosional features, you look at the rain erosion, and this diagram shows the difference between rain erosion and what you get with wind erosion in a Sahara-type desert condition. Also, the rock layers are composed of harder and softer layers, sort of like a layer cake. So in both cases, you take out the softer layers first, but it's very different. Wind weathering, younger me looking at wind weathering. We have wind weathering and wind erosion on well-dated tombs. These are just a few hundred meters away from the Sphinx itself, and these have been dated very specifically, very accurately by Egyptologists to the 4th dynasty, to approximately the same time that the Sphinx was supposedly carved. This is impossible that this weathering and erosion and the Sphinx weathering and erosion are contemporaneous. Here we have more wind tunnel, angular tunnel weathering features, and you can compare that to the rounded undulating profile, the rain profile. That is me standing in one of the fissures. I'm just there for scale to show you how extreme this weathering is. This is not something that occurs just in a few decades, as some of the Egyptologists have tried to claim, oh, it's modern weathering. No, that's not the case. It doesn't even occur in just a few centuries. We're talking millennia. So that was the first clue to me that we have to date the core body of the Sphinx back to an earlier period, pre-Sahara condition period. I estimated initially 5,000 to 7,000 BCE as a minimal date for the core body of the Sphinx, but in fact, evidence now indicates that goes back much further. So something that we did very early on, and I wanted subsurface data, is that we did subsurface seismic testing. Basically, we used a hammer on a steel plate. I did this with my colleague Thomas DeBecke, who is the person seated in the photograph that you're looking at. John Anthony West is actually standing behind him. And what we did is we put sound waves or energy waves into the rock. It bounces around, to put it very crudely, and we picked up subsurface evidence of weathering around the Sphinx. Now, as the rock is exposed, it begins to weather.